Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be exploring the bishop b5 line in the closed Sicilian. So after e4, c5, we're going to have knight c3, we're going to have knight c6, and if you watched my introduction to the Sicilian, you'll understand why I personally like to play this move knight c6 against knight c3. It's a good move that avoids a lot of unfavorable transpositions that we might not want to run into. And now we're going to be examining the move bishop b5. Just kind of putting the question to this knight right away. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and please click on your notification icon. Now, bishop b5 is actually a pretty tricky move. The first couple of times that I ran into this move, and actually even a few times after that, I've fallen for some of the traps that exist within this system. And there are actually some traps. It's not just a passive system where white wants to, just kind of hang back. White actually, a lot of times in this system, will develop very, very rapidly. And because of that, there's a lot of pitfalls that black can fall into, especially if he gets just a little bit too aggressive in the middle of the board. So because of that, I've developed these systems that kind of avoid falling into these pitfalls and kind of just avoid falling into these various traps. But the first thing that you have to do is you have to be aware of kind of what these traps are and how you can fall into them and what the dangers are. So the first move that you should play is you should certainly play the move knight to d4. You don't really want to allow bishop takes knight where you're going to be doubling your pawns. This is kind of what white wants. Now, I would say that for the most part, there's really just kind of two main options. There's some minor options here as well. There's going to be this move. F4 is kind of a minor option, but I don't think we should take that seriously. I mean, it can transpose into other lines, but for the most part, I don't think F4 has a ton of independent value. I think most of these positions should just be considered just almost slight edge black, like e6, knight f3, knight b5, knight takes b5, a6, knight c3. This is just this position is already just kind of a little ridiculous. like black has the bishop pair and no apparent problems whatsoever, and can continue with d5 at some point, and there's just going to be no apparent traps or anything like that. And then down the road, we're going to play like b5, b4, and a5 and bishop a6, and if they push this pawn, we're going to take our normal kind of French defense formation. So just to give you an idea of the types of things that would usually get played in a position like this and why this is basically just advantage black, we could have something like d5, for example, and then you might see e5, and then I would play something like either h5 or g6, either one. Castles, we might play b5. We might have played b5 last move too. It just depends. But this would be kind of like the normal type of game that I would achieve. People would do stuff like this. I would just bring this knight to f5, and then eventually we're just going to kick this knight. We're going to play b5 to b4, and then we're going to continue with a5, a6, a5, so that we can bring this bishop to this diagonal, and then it's really kind of just a very, very bad French defense is what it is, because white has not played pawn to d4, so it's not an exact facsimile of the French, but this actually is worse for white. One of the things that white has going for him in the French defense is he has managed to get a little bit more space in the middle of the board. In this position, the space is relatively equalized. White has some extra space on e5, but black has all this extra space on the queen side and in the middle of the board. So this position is just clearly advantage black. Black is doing very well here. You can almost just play this position by numbers at this point. Continuing with b4, a5, bishop e7, queen b6, bishop a6. And then sometimes you can even continue with pawn on h5 to h4. You've got lots of progress-making moves. So again, just kind of going back to the beginning of all this, I wouldn't take f4 very seriously. It's kind of like f4 on move 2. I don't take it very seriously. Really, the only f4 you have to take seriously is if they do the straight Grand Prix attack. After e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4 on move 3 is something that you do need to have some preparation against. But here, it's not something you need to take seriously. Also, a4 doesn't seem like much of an independent try, just kind of for similar reasons. Throwing in this move, this extra tempo for black. I mean, a6, bishop e2, you could play something like g6, for example. And you're just going to be playing a closed Sicilian where we've thrown in a6 and a4. And those moves were going to get thrown in eventually anyway. So we're basically just transposing back into a closed Sicilian where white has placed his bishop on e2 instead of g2. And this will certainly favor black. So this would be just a slight edge black and basically just a normal kind of closed Sicilian line. Anyways, so the two serious attempts here are going to be just developing a piece with the move knight f3 and saying, if you want my bishop pair, go ahead and take it. And then the other move is going to be retreating this bishop, saying, I want to keep my bishop pair, I want to play bishop c4. Now, of the two, I would say that bishop c4 is a bit trickier. After knight f3, my recommendation is actually just to play a really simple position that doesn't get played very much, so you'll have the opportunity to maybe shock your opponent with this move. I think if they're going to give you the bishop pair, you can go ahead and take it. Now, there is a little bit of danger to this because one of the things that white's doing is white's rapidly developing, but I'm playing this move with a pawn sacrifice in mind, basically, to catch up in development. So after knight b5, knight takes b5, I would recommend playing the move pawn to d5 immediately. And then when they take that pawn, we cannot take that pawn back, of course, because if we play queen takes d5, obviously we are losing to this knight fork. So we have to kick this knight back. We have to play pawn to a6. This knight is going to retreat, and then we need to threaten to get our pawn back. Now, if they just do something simple here like castles, and then we play knight takes d5, we've, of course, completely equalized. We're not even down material at that point. So we're doing really good. So the only move that they can play to kind of claim some sort of advantage is to basically just try to keep the pawn. They can play pawn to d4. And then I recommend going ahead and taking on d5. And then if they want to keep the pawn, unless they just want to play knight takes d5, queen takes d5, we have a completely equal position. They can take the pawn. So takes, we're going to play knight takes c3, queen d8, king d8, bc3. Okay, so now they have tripled isolated pawns, but they're up a pawn. And of course, we can't castle anymore, but we also have a bishop pair. And I personally think that black is doing a-okay here. Not only is black doing a-okay, I think that this position is underexplored. So the first thing we have to do is we have to play f6. We have to keep the knight out of e5 and g5. And it looks like a goofy move, but white can't prevent pawn to e5, which is basically the plan. We're going to play f6 followed by e5. So after castles, we play e5, and then after bishop e3, we are going to play the move that should have been played. This was actually played only one time that I could find, and that game continued with the move bishop f5, which I would call a second-rate move. We don't need to do this. If we have this position, we have plenty of compensation already for the pawn. We don't need to go crazy and try to attack stuff and try to get our pawn back. Totally unnecessary. We can just play bishop e6, and we just keep our bishops kind of behind these pawns, and we keep everything nice and tight and nice and close. So we're just going to play like bishop e6, bishop e7, king c7, and then we can just shuffle our rooks to the open files. And if we exchange rooks in this position, if all four rooks come off the board, black's position is probably, it's nearly winning. It's difficult to defend the pawn on a2, and it's basically impossible to defend the pawn on c5. The king would just come up to c6 and then take on c5. In order for white to kind of maintain the balance in this position, white needs to keep all the material on the board, including the rooks. And this becomes kind of difficult because black's strategy is pretty simple. Black is going to play, again, bishop e7, king c7, and shuffle the rooks to the open file. He's going to shuffle the rooks to the d file. And once the rooks get to the open file, it's going to be very tempting for white to try to exchange some of those rooks to contest that file. So white is somehow going to have to make sure that nothing bad happens on the d file while building up enough pressure on the b file to make things happen. And so far, nobody's shown me a line that actually does all of that. So as far as I can tell, black has completely equalized at this point, and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't just play this line. I think that this is just the way to go. I'll take one pawn down to play against tripled isolated pawns with a bishop pair, kind of any day of the week until somebody shows me a line that says that this is no good. So that's kind of the easy way to reply to all of this. You just take on b5 and you play this pawn sacrifice, and this is fine. So then the other line that you have to deal with is the move bishop c4. So this line is actually very tricky. There's a trap that's hidden within this line. So here's the trap. After pawn to e6, they're going to play knight on g to e2. And your goal is eventually you'd like to play d5. But you don't want to rush it. And the reason you don't want to rush it is because white has a ton of development compared to you. The only piece you've moved is you've moved the same piece twice in the opening. You've played knight c6 to d4. So first off, you can't play d5 right here, obviously, because he's got 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking d5, and you only have 2 defending. So you're going to have to build up to it. You're going to have to play knight f6. But then after castles, you're still not actually ready to play d5. This is a trap, and I've actually fallen for this trap a couple of times. If you play d5 right here, they can take it. They can take, and then they can take again. So then here's the idea. The idea is actually pretty clever. Is after knight takes d5, they're going to play knight takes d4, takes, and then queen h5. And of course, they're double attacking the knight on d5. And as you can see, we can't move it. If we move the knight on d5, then they have mate. So the only move that defends is bishop e6, and then they simply play rook e1. And because this bishop to b5 check exists, we don't have a good move here for black. So the main thing that we have to do in these positions is we have to get in the move a6 to prevent this bishop b5 check. And the reason that that works out is, let's say we play knight f6 and they castle, and then we go ahead and play a6, and then they just play a move like a4. So we've just thrown in a6, a4, but otherwise the position is exactly the same. Now we can get away with d5. Because now, if they go for the same line, ed5, ed5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, knight d4, cd4, queen h5, bishop e6, rook e1, now they don't have that bishop b5 check, which allows us to play the move knight to f4. And the reason this move works is because in the other line, they would have been able to play bishop b5 check, king e7, queen g5 check, and pick up this knight. But in this case, there is no bishop b5 check. They will simply have to move their queen. We can defend our knight, and black has a major advantage at this point. So that's why we need to be very cautious about when we play d5, but as a general rule, if you've played the move a6, you can usually get away with d5. Now another interesting kind of side note here is something that you can do instead of playing d5 is you can actually just pull this knight straight back. You can play knight c6. And you can just play kind of a passive position. You can just play knight c6, and you can play bishop e7, and then you can castle, and you can get all of your pieces developed, and then you can break in the middle of the board. And there's apparently nothing wrong with this, and it's a very safe way to play, and it actually throws a lot of people off that are playing the white pieces because they simply don't expect it, and most people don't have preparation on it. So they really don't know what to do. Most people are preparing to take that knight in the middle of the board at some point, and when you simply remove it from the sight line of the knight on e2, they have no idea how to continue. So knight c6 is another reasonable move here. So I guess the only other question would be what happens if they just take that knight on d4 or play the move pawn to e5 kind of preemptively. So both of those moves are of course possible. They could play e5 right here, and this position has been well known to be major advantage black. Basically the idea is black plays d5, and then after takes, we take on c4, they take, and we play bishop g7, and this position is major advantage black because black just has, of course, as you can see, supreme control of the center of the board, but more importantly, it's difficult for white to ever play a move like d3 or improve his position in some meaningful way. So this position is just major advantage black, and that's kind of well-known to theory. So e5 is nothing to be feared. And then, of course, the other way that they could play this is, let's say after castles and then you play a6, they could, of course, rip. They could play knight takes d4, and then you can play cd4 and then knight back. Now, this is apparently also nothing to be feared. If they play this line, we're just going to play something like b5. They're going to play bishop b3, and then we're going to continue. If you want to just hang on to the pawn, you can actually just play bishop c5, should be slight edge black, but you actually don't need to. You can play bishop b7 and just counterattack the pawn on e4, and they don't have a good move. If they take on d4, you simply take your pawn back. If they defend this pawn somehow, like if they play f3, then the pawn on d4 just simply can't be captured. You can just play any move. You could play like queen c7. They can't capture this pawn because this pin would simply win the knight. So the only other option would be, I guess they could push. They could play e5, but then of course knight g4 hits that pawn on e5. So again, if they take on d4, you have this other pawn of theirs is hanging. So f4 would kind of be forced, and then you can simply play d6, threaten to take that pawn again, and after pawn takes, queen takes, you're actually holding the pawn on d4. So it's never really possible to harvest that pawn, and it's actually not necessary to defend it directly, because it's always being defended indirectly. And all these positions appear to be slight advantage black, which is why a lot of people will play pawn to d3 here as their main move. And then here you can just get, I think, an advantage with black by getting the bishop pair. You can play b5, bishop b3, knight b3, a b3, bishop b7, and you can declare yourself at least equal here, if not a little bit better for black. This was actually played between Tivyakov and Alexei Shirov in Wickensee in 2010. So if you want to take a look at that full game, black actually did quite well there. So anyways, that's how you face the bishop b5 line in the Closed Sicilian. I hope you found that video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.